You guys must just be full from lunch and ready to take a nap if you come to listen to sales tax right after lunch. So really just going to talk quickly about sales tax, what's going on in the industry, what's going on with South Dakota Wayfair, talk to you about Vertex. I can't see this. A little bit about Vertex, what we do with connecting people with what matters from a tax perspective, right? Vertex has been in business for about 40 years. Started with a paper book product from a sales tax perspective, and now do automated sales tax and integrate it with Magento. Some of the customers we've helped, right? So everybody from some of the largest organizations down to small and mid-market as well. So if you bought your cup of Starbucks coffee this morning, I can guarantee you that the sales tax collected was accurate. So if you want to talk a little bit about the Magento partnership, we started a relationship with Magento about 4 years ago. We've been a premier partner since 2017. And we're the only sales tax provider bundled into the Magento dashboard, right? So if you install Magento and you're looking to manage your sales tax responsibilities, you can simply enable the Vertex integration, contact Vertex to set up an account, and start collecting sales tax. So everybody's like, well, why sales tax? What do I have to be concerned with sales tax? I'm not sure I get it. And a lot of organizations today probably don't focus on sales tax, or it becomes a second thought or an afterthought in the sales process. And quite frankly, as an organization, if you want to create a poor experience for your customer, you don't have to collect sales tax, right? You can actually just send a letter to your customer who purchased goods from your website and send them a letter and say, hey, by the way, we sent your state a 1099 and you're responsible for remitting the sales tax in that case, right? It doesn't present a very good customer experience when we talk about sales tax. So why do we do sales tax automation, right? Especially in the small mid-market. Have a lot of people who don't have that sales expertise, right? They're not focusing on tax every day. They don't know if they have Nexus in a jurisdiction or if they have a responsibility in a jurisdiction to collect sales tax. They're unaware of the different rates and the varying rates that occur from a sales tax perspective. Just this year, if I leave the Wayfair discussion out of it for a minute, in the first half of 2019, there were over 335 sales tax changes from a jurisdiction perspective, right? So jurisdictions are constantly changing and updating their sales tax rules. That's why you want to automate. South Dakota Wayfair, anybody heard of this? Anybody understand what happened with South Dakota and Wayfair? Rachel, yes? No? So basically, South Dakota went to the Supreme Court stating that Wayfair was required to collect sales tax and remit, even though they didn't have a physical presence in the state, right? And this goes back to Quill versus North Dakota, right? So Quill was a catalog organization who said, I don't have physical nexus in North Dakota, so I don't have to collect sales tax. And at that time, the Supreme Court said, you know what, you're right. Well, South Dakota went back 2 years ago and started fighting with Wayfair to have sales tax collected from remote sellers. And they won. Right? So when they won, it basically gave every state the opportunity now to impose a sales tax on remote sellers, right? It's what we call creating economic nexus. I'm just going to scroll down through here so you can see, and this is constantly changing. Right? Most states today have enacted some type of legislation. It's either passed or it's going through the process of being passed, right? The legislation is talking about certain thresholds that apply when you're doing remote selling, right? So if I'm a remote seller and I do $100,000 worth of business into South Dakota, I am required to register with South Dakota and start collecting and remitting sales tax. That's just an example. They've also put a threshold in from a number of transactions. So if I'm doing over 200 transactions in a given year, I'm required to register, collect, and remit the sales tax. So what should you be doing as it comes to starting to think about sales tax? Anybody working through a process right now where you're trying to engage with sales tax, you're trying to do analysis on your business to figure out should I or shouldn't I be collecting, right? That's really what you need to be doing today. You need to start looking at your business and prioritizing the states in which you know you're approaching those thresholds, right? The idea here is that if you haven't hit the thresholds yet, you don't have to register. If you know you're going to hit the thresholds, you want to start planning your business around, planning some business activity around registering those for those jurisdictions, enabling a tax solution so that you can collect and remit the appropriate sales tax. So you want to review those current processes where you think you may, right? Prioritize where you think you already may be reaching the thresholds or have reached the threshold, or, and then start with the places where you're not really sure where your business is going. Right, the other piece of that says if you know you've already reached the thresholds in certain jurisdictions based on the legislation, you actually want to contact the jurisdictions. You may want to contact the jurisdiction. You may want to voluntarily disclose to the jurisdiction that, hey, I've hit the thresholds in this state. I'm going to register. I'm registering, and you voluntarily disclose that you're doing that process. Right? It gives the state the opportunity to say, you're registering today, we're going to worry about everything from this day forward, and they may not come back and say, well, you need to collect or you need to remit the sales tax for the past 6 months, as an example. So when we talk about sales tax automation, we talk about the complexity around tax, right? Because anybody can look at a rate. Right? The state sales tax in California could be as high as 10%, could be as low as 7%. And it all depends on what jurisdiction you're in and how what jurisdiction you're in and where the destination of that sale occurs. Right? Where am I delivering my goods to? So there's different rates in every jurisdiction, in every state. You have state, city, local, and district taxes. Some states have, or some counties have stadium taxes or transportation taxes as part of their district taxes. Not an easy scenario. If you're just doing business in one state, if you're doing business in Pennsylvania, as an example, the sales tax rate is 6%. Unless you're in Allegheny County, it's 8%, right? You get an extra 2%. But if you're doing business in California, as I said, your tax could be anywhere from 10 to 7%. If you're doing business in Colorado, now you're talking about home rule states where at times I'm charged at destination. If I'm a small seller, I'm charged at the origin of the order, right? This is the complexity that we talk about from a sales tax perspective. Why it makes sense to automate. If you don't have an organization who's focused on tax in your businesses, tax becomes very complex. Right? The other reason to automate, when we talk about Wayfair, the whole purpose behind Wayfair was states are looking for more revenue. They're looking for their dollars so that they can apply them to their improvements in their states. And they're going to start coming after folks from an audit perspective to try to gain that revenue. So from a Vertex perspective, with the integration that we have with Magento, we provide an end-to-end solution from a sales tax perspective, right? So once you set up the integration from a Vertex perspective, and you've licensed with, from Magento, and you've licensed with Vertex, you can start configuring the environment to collect sales tax, right? So we're going to provide you the right sales tax rules and rates based on the products and services that you sell for the states and jurisdictions in which you're doing business. We're able to collect exemption certificates. Anybody manage exemption certificates as part of their process? Have the ability to manage those exemption certificates within the Vertex application. We also provide the ability for you to provide your customers the opportunity to load their own exemptions into the system. We do returns automation, so that end-to-end process says, as I'm calculating the sales tax in the jurisdiction, I would like to generate a return. We generate that return. You as a customer can choose to take that return and file and remit it to the jurisdiction on your own behalf, or you can work with Vertex to do that for you. Right? So we can file and remit in the jurisdictions. If you're not doing sales and use tax automation, you're manually researching rules and rates, right? An example could be clothing. Could be in New York, I think clothing is non-taxable unless it's a luxury item purchase. However, bandanas in New York are taxable, right? So as you configure your environment, you're going, I need to make sure I'm charging the appropriate sales tax on bandanas. If you're in a confection business and you're selling candy bars, right? If you're selling a Snickers bar, my business is a health food company. A Snickers bar has nuts, so I'm going to sell that as a health food. It may be taxed at a different rate as a health food versus if I sell it as a confection or a candy, right? So those are business decisions you have to make when you're configuring the sales tax engine. But part of the process from a Vertex perspective is once that's been configured, we're managing the process for you from a sales tax calculation perspective. So we're going to ensure that we're providing the right tax back or the right rules and rates that apply to the specific products and goods that you're servicing. Right, so you have to manage, that fixes the manual research of product taxability. Talked about managing exemptions, and then we're also going to manage the reporting piece for you if you so like, if you choose. Okay. Any questions?
Do you integrate with any accounting systems?
So we do. So we do have an integration to Sage 100, yes. And we integrate with a lot of, I think it's over 100 integrations that we support right now from a Vertex perspective. So we integrate with everything from Oracle ERPs down to QuickBooks Online. Right, so we have a depth and breadth of different integrations. We also have a program for those who have in-house accounting systems where they can write integrations to our solution as well. As I stated, we're bundled as part of the Magento product. So if you purchase Magento and you're looking to enable sales tax, it's as simply as going into the store configurator, going down to the sales tax tab and turning on Vertex. Reaching out to a Vertex from a sales perspective so we can provide you an account. Some examples when we talk about sales tax, and I'm glad you brought up the accounting system, right? Because different organizations have different processes as they're working through collecting sales tax. So you may be using your storefront on Magento where you're actually quoting orders, but you're fulfilling those orders through your accounting package, right? And that's where you're managing your invoice process. So there's different scenarios that you can create from a tax perspective in order to make sure you're calculating the tax appropriately and that you're only recording that transaction once from a journal perspective, right? Here we have a shopping cart with the idea of an example of tax. So from a tax perspective, what occurs in Magento is as you're building your invoice, when you hit, you can get an estimate, it will make a sales tax call out to our tax engine where we'll return the tax. It's when you make an invoice call that we actually record that to a tax journal in the Vertex system to be able to remit, right? To be able to generate reports and returns as part of that process. Tax is collected at checkout, right? Before it goes to your payment provider like PayPal. Right. Interesting enough, submitting the order within the Magento cart from your website creates what we call from a tax perspective, it's a quote call type message, right? So what that's going to do is respond to the request with tax on the order. The invoice process typically will happen from your Magento admin console, right? So if you're working from an admin console perspective, when you submit the order in your admin console, that's typically where that invoice call gets made, which then hits what we call the tax journal from a Vertex standpoint for reporting purposes. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
How do you determine tax code? Is it based off the address or is it zip code based?
So tax is determined in different ways. So it is based off of what we call situs. And what situs is, it's going to determine whether or not we're going to charge tax based on the ship from or the ship to. And that's it has different rules based on different states on how that's collected. Colorado just enacted legislation for remote sellers, where as a remote seller, It used to be that they could charge tax at the destination and you would have to, it would be what we call the seller's use tax. What they've done is now for all remote sellers, it's destination-based. So the situs is determined at the destination, so you're taxed at that jurisdiction, right? Colorado is one of the complex states because you have the state sales tax rate. It's a home rule state, and then you have the local taxes collected by the locally administered and then some of the lower level jurisdictions. Okay? Yes?
So is the merchant responsible for the taxes when the product is shipped out? So say you order a product today and the product is shipped out like 5 days later from the warehouse, is the merchant required to calculate the tax again?
The merchant's responsible for collecting tax at the time of order. Typically, there's a fulfillment process that allows you may, depending on how you work your environment, my guess is if you're fulfilling the order out of your Magento admin console or a different system, you're invoicing at the time of shipment, so you may want to make another sales tax call. The challenge there becomes from a customer perspective, if you do it crossing monthly boundaries, sales tax rules and rates change, so if the rate changes, the customer may be paying more or less based on how your business process works, right? And that gets challenging. So that's a business decision that you have to make of how you're going to manage that sales tax process. Am I going to charge it at the time of order, or am I going to charge it at the time of shipping, right? The other benefit when we talk about sales tax and product taxability that you probably are unaware of when you're managing those rates and rules is sales tax holidays. Different states have different sales tax holidays. If you're not automated, my guess is you're not taking advantage of those sales tax holidays in the jurisdictions in which you're doing business. That's another benefit of leveraging an automated solution. Any other questions? Anybody, I asked, but some other people walking in, anybody concerned about Wayfair? Anybody focused on that from a business perspective? Looking for what liability they have in different jurisdictions? Or how many of you actually registered for sales tax in all the jurisdictions that you're actually doing business in, whether or not you've met the thresholds? No? Okay. I didn't give all the thresholds. You can go out to our website at vertexinc.com. We have a blog section that talks about Wayfair and its impact and lists all the states that have enacted legislation. I think it's all but one right now. And then we list what the thresholds there are on that website.
The minimum threshold is $1 million of sales in that state, is that right? Or the threshold's below?
All the thresholds that I'm aware of are below $1 million. So as I know them right now, I think, don't quote me on it, I think California is 500,000 in sales. South Dakota is 100,000. Most states are between 100 and 200,000 from a dollar perspective. The other challenging piece of that is there's a question of, is it on gross sales or just revenue? So there's some differentiation in each state that you should read up on to understand what those thresholds are because they vary by state. A lot of states, as I said, start it with 200,000 transactions or $100,000 worth of business. Some have backed off on the number of transaction threshold and they're just focused on revenue. But, you know, when we talk about the sales process, if you're selling into a state where you have to understand these thresholds, if you're selling into a state, South Dakota, California, and every sale that you make into that jurisdiction is exempt, and you're collecting the exempt certificates for that, you're still required, at least based off the current legislation, to register and remit that sales tax return, reporting the total sales and all of the exempt information, right? So just because you're doing exempt sales or non-taxable sales, when we talk about the thresholds, they're not, how much tax do I have to charge? It's based off of your sales, whether or not there's tax applied or not, right? Again, when you're approaching those thresholds, it makes most sense if you don't have a tax department or an in-house accounting group to talk to a trusted tax advisor as part of that process to understand where you may be reaching the thresholds. Right? As part of the threshold process, they talk about, I'm going to hit those thresholds this year, so I have to start my registration coming in January, right? And then start collecting and remitting based off of that knowledge, right? Once I hit those thresholds, that's when I have to start collecting and remitting, right? Doesn't, yes.
And it's kind of what you were just saying there about talking with your accounting firm to be able to determine whether you're going to meet those thresholds. Is that something, if you're hooked up with Vertex, so you're feeding transactions to Vertex and you're getting rates back, is that something the Vertex platform can indicate, like, okay, you crossed the threshold or you're approaching the threshold based on data that's being fed there?
We won't do that. And the reason we don't do that is because, as I said, there's companies using different systems when they're leveraging Vertex. So they're using us for an e-commerce standpoint with Magento. They may have an ERP in the back end, and they're doing different business opportunities in both places. We don't know whether or not you're hitting those thresholds in all areas of your business, right? What we can do is you can run a transaction detail report from our system where you can look through and say, okay, it looks like I'm going to reach those thresholds here, and start the process. But we don't automate that process today. Yes?
So I live in a state with different sales tax systems by state, county, and municipality. Does Wayfair apply to this? Are there internet sellers that are having to do sales tax returns, even with no presence in the state, to a city or a county, or is it all just state level?
So the Wayfair ruling was a state ruling, but I can tell you that when you're collecting sales tax, if I use Colorado as an example, it's state sales tax. But the complexity around Colorado says, I'm selling into Colorado. I've never sold into Boulder, Colorado before, but I just had a sale in Boulder, Colorado. When I generate that return from a Vertex standpoint, the state return is going to come up and it's going to show me the tax. At the bottom of the return, it's going to show me Boulder, Colorado, and it's going to give me the number, the tax amount that I collected I'm supposed to remit. And there's something called, it's a little technical, something called a branch ID. I have never registered for Boulder, Colorado. I can't remit that return until I register for Boulder so that the state can disperse the funds to that jurisdiction, right? So when we talk about sales tax, it's all state collected. Some of it is locally administered, but the tax is going to be based off the destination that you're collecting in. The other thing about sales tax is once you start collecting it, you have to report it, right? So you do, or you have to refund your customers the difference, right? If you've collected sales tax and you don't remit it to the jurisdiction for whatever reason, you have to refund it to your customer. And if by chance you're registered in that jurisdiction and you're audited, you have to prove to them why you did that. So once you register, the onus is on you as a business to start collecting and remitting. Even if you stop doing business in that state, you have the opportunity to cancel your business license with the state or remit $0 returns.
We'll have an app store that people can come in and buy apps. We've asked this question multiple times at Avalara and other products at CyberSource, but we have conflicting information. Obviously there's no ship-to information when the customers purchase the apps. Do you have to collect taxes or not? We have an office in Jersey, so is the tax based in Jersey or not?
Well, see, this is where it gets interesting. People are coming to your app store from their location. So theoretically, you certainly have Nexus and physical presence in New Jersey, so you have to be registered in New Jersey. And if a buyer is buying in New Jersey, I believe you're probably required to collect that sales tax and remit to the state of New Jersey. If I'm ordering from you if I come into your app store and I order from Pennsylvania, or you have customers who in Pennsylvania and they order $100,000 worth of stuff from your app store, you have to talk to an accountant, but that may create Nexus for you in Pennsylvania based on economic Nexus.
Do we find that information, the customer's location, via like IP address or something? Because
There's no ship to. Do they have to sign up for a membership with the organization? Is there a membership or anything?
they do have to create an account.
So if they create an account, my guess is they have an address that you're going to have to, yeah. And that's where I would talk to, like I said, I would talk to a tax advisor, right? I'm not a tax specialist. I work for a sales and use tax automation company. We can certainly automate the process, and we'll know that as we automate it, you'll get the right tax applied. But from a Nexus perspective, you really want to talk to a tax advisor who can say to you, yes, this creates Nexus. because there are different scenarios in every world that create Nexus, and this just happens to be digital or economic Nexus that we're talking about. Any additional questions? Anybody trying to expand globally right now? Anybody worried about value-added tax? No? All right. We also support value-added tax, yes. See, I plugged that for us, just to throw that out there.
Do you guys do excise tax? We actually, we've been in, I know the answer because we've been in conversation with you for quite a while. It seems like an area that you probably put some more expansion into.
Yeah, so excise tax is interesting. It's not a sales tax. And then we start talking about different categories of excise tax. So it is something that in some areas we have excise tax support. If you're looking at tobacco as an example, we don't support the excise tax there yet. It's one of the content areas that we're investigating from a roadmap perspective. Excise taxes get to be complex from a automation perspective because we're not sure, work through the process of where the tax is supposed to be collected and when and by whom.
Right.
Yeah. So
But you're moving into that space?
it's a roadmap item that we've been investigating. Look, if you looked at the customer list that we presented earlier, some of those customers also asked for support for tobacco, yeah. So it's stuff that we're working towards. Additional questions? Well, if you have any other questions, please feel free to stop by the table on the 3rd or 4th floor somewhere. It's upstairs where the food was. Stop by and ask anything or get any additional information you may need. Okay? Thank you very much.